Welcome to another edition of Believers Fellowship Bible Time. I'm really glad that you could join us today as we continue walking through the chapters of the Bible. Today we're coming to Deuteronomy 24 and 25. But before we get into those chapters, I just want to read to you the beginning of Psalm 1. Psalm 1. You just listen as I read the first three verses here of Psalm 1. It says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers." That's a great statement, and it talks about what it is you give your attention to. And the man who is blessed, the man who is fruitful in all seasons, is the man who delights in the law of the Lord. He's not listening to the stuff of the world. He's delighting in the law of the Lord. In fact, he's meditating on it day and night. And that is so important because I think in these days, especially in these days when there's a coronavirus crisis and there's more information than you can digest, there's a lot of confusion. Even Christians are confused, and I think it's based on who they're listening to. They don't have an adequate biblical filter with which they can evaluate what they're hearing, and so they get confused. They get led astray. They make bad decisions, and they pass on this bad information that they're partaking of themselves. They got to delight in the law of the Lord. Now, when this psalm was written, and it says delighting in the law of the Lord, it's referring to just what we're looking at. It's referring to basically the first 5 books of the Bible. It's referring to what we call the Pentateuch, the Torah, the law of God, the books given to us by Moses. And you might think, well, how does anybody delight in those first 5 books? I find a lot of it difficult to understand. Well, hey, that's our problem. It's not the Bible's problem. We need to deal with the challenges that are created by our lack of knowledge, our ignorance of the language, of the culture, of the history. We need to overcome that. And, in Ezra, when we get to Ezra, we're going to learn about that great man of God. And the history tells us that he had memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. And so that's important for us to keep in mind, that we're to the delight in the law of the Lord. It is something that is meant for us to really get into and to really understand. It provides a foundation for what we're looking at. In fact, a lot of what we're going to read in the rest of what we call the Old Testament is going to be referring back to the law. And so that's why we want to look at it carefully. And it particularly, I say that because today we come to chapters 24 and 25, which could seem like it's just a random string of stuff. This topic, that topic, jumping all over the place. Doesn't seem to be any continuity to it. But you have to just be patient, and you have to look at it, and you have to look for themes. What is being covered here? And what you really see in these 2 chapters is that God cares. God expresses an awful lot of care for an awful lot of people. And in fact, you could say that a dominant theme throughout these 2 chapters is that God cares, and he wants us to treat everybody with dignity. Treat people with dignity, whether they are debtors of yours, whether they are workers working for you, whether they are the poor who are gleaning from your field, whether it's your oxen who's working your field for you. He wants you to treat that animal with dignity, even whether it's criminals. Did you notice that? Criminals, even guilty criminals, they're to be punished. And chapter 25, verse 3 talks about the number of stripes to be administered to them, but not any more than that, so that your brother not be degraded in your sight. See, God cares about things like this. He even wants criminals treated with dignity. He wants you to treat your customers with dignity. Don't have different weights there. And even if, you might have noticed this in chapter 25, and I don't want to bring too much attention to this, but hey, women, if somebody's beating up on your husband, well, we can perfectly understand you wanting to get in there and help your husband. But hey, you got to even treat the guy who's beating up your husband with dignity. You read that passage again and see what it's talking about. And so you could say that the theme here is God cares. He cares about all kinds of people, and he wants all of them to be treated with dignity. He wants you to do what's right. He wants you to deal with evil. And even if you look at chapter 24, verse 7, this is an application of the 8th commandment, not to steal, because it talks about in 24:7, if a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, and if he treats him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. So shall you purge the evil from your midst. Is that kind of stuff even happening today, where people are getting stolen, they're getting kidnapped, and then sold into some kind of slavery? Yeah, it still happens today. God says that kind of evil needs to be purged from the land. So God's concerned with doing things the right way, whether it's business or even how you treat a criminal or how you treat an oxen, how you even treat the guy who's beating up your husband. God cares about that things be handled the right way and that evil be purged from the land. But one of the other things that really stands out, another dominant theme here, is how important the family is to God. And there are some interesting things said in these 2 chapters about family. I mean, did you read the part in chapter 25, verses 5 to 10, which talks about if a guy takes a wife and then he dies and he didn't have any children, well, then it's the responsibility of his brother to take his wife and to produce offspring in his brother's name. I mean, to me, that's the ultimate in premarital counseling, because if my older brother's getting married to somebody, and the possibility is she could wind up being my wife someday, yeah, I'm weighing in on this decision. You can see how important that is. And did you notice? I mean, talk about interesting stuff. If that happens and the brother says, "Nah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take her for my wife. I'm not going to raise up offspring for my brother. I'm not going to do that." Well, look at this here in chapter 25, verse 8. It says, "Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. And if he persists, saying, 'I do not wish to take her,' then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders." Now listen to this. "And pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house," check this out, bad enough he got his sandal taken off and spit in his face, "but the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off." Well, man, that's like overwhelming peer pressure. That's social pressure that nobody wants to face. And so this whole thing here is taken pretty seriously, which, we can kind of laugh about it. It sounds kind of comical to us, but what it's communicating, God takes family seriously. We need to take family seriously. And God sees family as a good thing, an enjoyable thing. In fact, chapter 24, verse 5, it says, "When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken." That sounds like a great idea. What a great way to start off the marriage, where you're together for a year. You don't have any liabilities, responsibilities to the government. They can't make you go anything. They can't make you fight in a war, because they want you staying home and strengthening your marriage, getting off to a good start in your family. That's really practical, and that is important, and it shows that God thinks that when you get married, you should take that serious and get it off to a good start. But perhaps the most well-known passage about family in these 2 chapters is chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, that talks about divorce and remarriage. And if a man divorces his wife for some uncleanness, obviously it wasn't adultery, or else she'd have been put to death, but something he doesn't like, he divorces her, she goes marry somebody else. That guy either dies or divorces her. Well, she can't go back to the first husband, because it says in verse 4, she's been defiled. Defiled in what way? Well, illegitimate divorces multiply adultery. See, this is not condoning divorce. This is not saying it's okay to divorce just as long as you go through the right steps here. In fact, Jesus comments on this in Matthew 19, verses 3 through 9. He's saying, Moses permitted divorce, and this is what's happening here. He's regulating it, really, but it's happening because of the hardness of people's hearts. This wasn't God's plan from the beginning. Jesus goes back and talks about one man, one woman for life. And so this is just regulating it and giving instruction regarding what to do in the case of when people do divorce. But I want you to notice this thing about adulteries. Illegitimate divorces creates adultery, because it's adultery to go marry somebody else if you didn't have a legitimate divorce in the first case. And it says there in verse 44 that kind of thing, it's an abomination before the Lord. Now, before you get all worked up about that and say, that is for sure, and there's people that are an abomination to the Lord, and what they're doing is an abomination to the Lord, and you get all self-righteous about it. Well, I want you to look at one other verse, chapter 25, verse 16. This is talking about in business. In business, the idea of having unfair weights, so it shows like it's to your advantage as the business owner. It says here in verse 16, for all who do such things, all who act dishonestly are an abomination to the Lord your God. You ever done anything dishonest in your business? That's an abomination to the Lord. See, we need to look at the whole book. We need to read everything. We need to delight in the law of the Lord, because by delighting in it, meditating on it day and night, we will have our minds and our thoughts and our words and actions regulated by the Word of God, and will walk in the way of blessing, not the way of abomination. We need to know God's Word. I'm so thankful that you're reading it along with me and that you're joining me for Bible time. And I hope that we're going to keep learning how important it is and what a great thing it is to be able to delight in the law of the Lord. So God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow for more Bible time.